Hello, everybody. I'm Anaji, and this is FMV Reviews. So today we're going to be talking about the newest Disney animated film, Raya and the Last Dragon. So I didn't really watch a whole lot of trailers or anything for this movie. I was intrigued by the fact that it seemed to be depicting Southeast Asian culture, and that definitely made me excited. I do think Asian culture is not really represented in America a whole lot, especially in like mainstream culture. But I am seeing a step towards representing that stuff. But I would say, as much as just what I would consider mainstream Asian culture of like Japanese, Chinese, and Korean stuff is not super represented in the West, and especially in America, Southeast Asian stuff is even less represented. I'm talking about like the Philippines, Vietnam, Laos, and that's even less represented in an already underrepresented group of people. So with Raya the Last Dragon being announced, I was excited to watch it, and now I'm going to give you some of my thoughts on it. So the animation for this movie is beautiful. I think Disney, they've always been pretty good when it comes to animation, but in terms of their CGI now, I think because they have several people who were key figures in Pixar now running the Disney animation studio, you definitely notice a bump in quality, not only of just the animation, but of the storytelling. And the animation here, I had several moments just looking at the background where it looked photorealistic. I noticed this for the first time in like Toy Story and in Soul, but now I'm seeing that it's just becoming a consistent thing with Disney. And it also just it's also not even just like the photorealism of stuff. Even when they decide to embellish or enhance certain things, it's just really beautiful. This land of I guess they call it Kumandra or whatnot. It's really beautiful, and it was really nice to see. And I'm glad they were able to reflect that culture back. I would also say it's been nice to see Disney starting to experiment with their animation. And what I mean by that is like DreamWorks, I noticed, while the DreamWorks stuff is not in terms of story and whatnot is not as high quality, they are more willing to experiment. And I noticed this back in The Boss Baby, where when the kid was doing his imagination stuff, they would switch animation styles. That's something I haven't really noticed Disney do, but they're starting to do it. And there's several moments within this film where they do it in terms of doing the exposition thing of the legend of Kumandra, and also just in terms of explaining like a heist thing that they're going to do. And I appreciate it. It helps to sort of keep things visually interesting when you're watching an animated film. And I'm glad that Disney is starting to open up to experiment with their animation a little bit more. I think this movie has some really well done fight choreography, which is rare to say, but yeah, the actual fighting stuff is pretty well choreographed. Uh, I, I'll show some of it right here while I'm talking about it, but yeah, you can see this. You can see blows, you can see feints, and also since they're pulling from some of the region's actual fighting style, like I'm pretty sure I saw some Eskrima slash like Kali stick work going on, and that was nice to see, especially because it has been used in film and whatnot, like with the Taken series or the Born Identity series, but it's nice to see it being done by characters that actually reflect the cultures with which those fighting styles came from. That's it. I thought that was pretty good. The movie's fast paced and is definitely entertaining. I didn't really have any moments where I was bored or kind of checking my watch to go, okay, when is this going to be done? It's pretty well paced, especially in the way that they set the story up. Um, this is also, I would also add this to movies that I wish came out in theaters. I felt this with Soul, where you have it where Disney is making these more culturally diverse films, straying away from the more sort of like European centric fairy tales that they became famous for, and they're starting to. I kind of noticed it with Moana, which I felt was like a resounding success. And it's nice to see other cultures get this treatment. It's just unfortunate that with the circumstances of the world at the moment, that these could not be in theaters. But hey, I could be totally wrong. I don't know if Disney Plus really releases accurate numbers of how many people are watching things, but maybe through their Disney Plus streaming platform, maybe they're exposing it to even wider audience. I just sometimes wish I could go to a theater and see the direct reaction of an audience going wow and really resonating with a culture that maybe isn't theirs, because I would definitely say, as someone of color, people of color have had, especially if you're in America, have had to learn how to empathize and connect to characters who maybe didn't even look like us or reflect us culturally. And it's nice to see that happen from the other side. I thought the world of this movie was interesting and varied enough that it actually kind of, I wouldn't be opposed to Disney maybe even taking Raya the Last Dragon and turning it into a TV show, because they do this pretty good job of setting up these different regions of like fang, tail, spine, talon, and heart, and they're all distinct enough that I actually would like to spend some time in the world to see, well, how does tail think about Kumandra, or how does Fang feel about the world? They're interesting enough that I would be down for it to do a TV show. You don't have to, but I'd be down. I think overall this movie has a pretty good message, and I think it does play into the movie's structure a little bit. I have been noticing Disney starting to play with structure in terms of how they treat villains or what is the villain. I thought this movie had a pretty heartwarming message that it at times made me wish that things were as simple as they were in the movie. As they are in the movie, I wish they could sometimes be as simple in the real world, because the message the movie has is something that our world probably definitely needs. But yeah, I thought it was a pretty positive message. I'm also hoping that this movie's success leads to more Asian representation in media, because like I said earlier, Asian culture in terms of America is heavily underrepresented. You know what I'm saying? Unless you're one of the main three of China, Korea, or Japan, you pretty much have no representation. And even China, Korea, and Japan, they're fairly underrepresented as well. Like, let's be real, in terms of America, any stars that we get that are Asian, they tended to have, they usually had to make it in their homeland first and then come over to the West, which basically means the West had no investment in them being a star and basically made them do all the work. And then like once they did, all the hard work came in and was like, oh, okay, I guess we can hold you up. But even then, they don't put him in a lot of stuff. Now, I do want to get into something that is not necessarily a ding on the film, but something that I hope that Disney and Western studios start to do a better job of if they're going to have Asian representation in their stories and in their properties they're going to make. So, like I mentioned earlier with this film is sort of emphasizing its look and its cultural standpoint from Southeast Asian culture, which is, let me pull it up from their Wikipedia. So they pulled from, I'm probably, if I say any of these wrong, I apologize, but Brunei, Singapore, Laos, Thailand, Timor-Leste, Cambodia, Vietnam, Myanmar, Malaysia, Indonesia, and the Philippines. Now, I grew up in Hawaii, and in Hawaii, there is a huge Filipino culture. So I'm fairly familiar with the way it looks and the way the people look and the way their cultural stuff is. And when I looked at the cast of this film, I felt conflicted, because while it's great that the majority of the cast is Asian or are Asian, when I see what regions they're pulling from and I look into the backgrounds of some of the actors, they don't reflect that culture. So you have a word, Kelly Marie Tran, famously, and maybe for some fan communities, infamously from the Star Wars Last Jedi, she's playing the main character, and she is of Vietnamese background, which is great because there's one of the regions that they're pulling from. But when I go down the cast, Aquafina, Gemma Chan, Daniel Dae Kim, Benedict Wong, Sandra Oh, all actors that I'm a fan of, and I'm glad that they're getting work, but they're not from these regions. Like Aquafina, Chinese, Gemma Chan, Chinese, Daniel Dae Kim, Korean, Sandra Oh, Korean, Benedict Wong, Chinese. Great that they're getting representation, but they're not from these regions. So, and I don't think Disney was trying to do this, but what it makes me think of growing up, especially in America, is that Americans, especially when I was growing up, tended to just kind of lump a bunch of Asian cultures together. Like, oh, what's the difference between Chinese and Korean and Japanese and Vietnamese? They're all Asian. It doesn't matter. Not realizing, like, no, there are distinctions. And because this movie is emphasizing its gaze on a certain aspect of an Asian community, which is already underrepresented in media, but also Southeast Asian culture, which is even within that Asian representation an even more underrepresented part. I felt conflicted about the fact that they could not get more actors. Like, why was Dante Basco not in it? He's a fairly famous Filipino voice actor. Why was he not in this? He's Filipino. It made me kind of conflicted because I would like to see more people from those backgrounds given a platform to be in the mainstream culture because they are underrepresented. So I just wanted to bring that up. For me, it doesn't heavily affect the score of the film, but being that I am Asian, I can't help but notice that and wish that Disney maybe tried harder to look at the region and the culture that they're pulling from and finding actors and people who are from that culture and bringing them on, because Disney has a huge platform. Like, it could have maybe helped jumpstart a bunch of new actors and actresses' careers and bring them to a new audience. And unfortunately, not to say that Daniel Day Kim and Awkwafina don't benefit from this kind of stuff, but they already are sort of established, and because they are linked to Asian cultures that get more representation, not to say that they don't need the exposure, but they don't need it as bad as people who are from these Southeast Asian cultures that are underrepresented. So I just wanted to bring up that kind of thing. If you're from these regions and you've seen seen this movie, let me know what you think. Maybe you weren't offended by it, maybe you were, but I would be curious to know. So with that, I think Raya the Last Dragon is a pretty entertaining piece of film. I definitely like the fact that Disney's trying to be more diverse from where it's pulling its stories. I do hope they start to pay attention a little bit more to where the actors are coming from, and especially if they are from these cultures. But overall, I would give Raya the Last Dragon a solid 8 out of 10. Or maybe even a little bit like a lower 8 out of 10. Yeah. So if you dug this review, make sure you like, share, and subscribe to the channel, and I will talk to y'all later. Bye.